All right, so Marco Rubio, the senator from the great state of Florida, joins us. Senator, I know you got a lot of heat for those comments, but, I mean, the AP couldn't get an answer either. And I think on the issues that you brought up, Benghazi and the reset with Russia, I think you're accurate. How can one claim success in either of those cases?
Well, first, thanks for having me on. I actually think the argument can be made that the United States has suffered some very significant reputational damage over the last 5 years, of which 4, Hillary Clinton was the Secretary of State. I would go on to say that America is increasingly viewed as unreliable, which is a very dangerous thing to be viewed as for the world's most important country. So I think this is a record, and certainly, she's had some achievements. She's going to talk about them. I think she also needs to be held accountable for the failures that occurred during her time at the helm in the State Department. Ultimately, the buck stops with the president. That's where she worked, and she's certainly going to try to brag about what she was able to do. I think she's got to be held accountable for the failures.
Are you that convinced she's running?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I was asked that question in general terms about her tenure at the Secretary of State. My answer was that I think America's foreign policy today is weaker and less reliable, and quite frankly, it places America in a more vulnerable position than we were before she was Secretary of State.
All right, a lot of news was made this week as Jonathan Karl asked you twice if you're ready to become President of the United States, and I want to play the question and answer.
If I decide to run for president, I will not have some sort of exit strategy to run for the Senate. So that will be a decision not to run for re-election. I believe that if you want to be President of the United States, you run for president. It's all or nothing. You don't run for president with some eject button in the cockpit that allows you to go on an exit ramp if it doesn't work out.
Do you think you're ready to be president?
I do. I mean, but I think that's true for multiple other people that would want to run. I mean, I'll be 43 this month, but the other thing that perhaps people don't realize, I've served now in public office for the better part of 14 years. And most importantly, I think a president has to have a clear vision of where the country needs to go and clear ideas about how to get it there. And I think we're very blessed in our party to have a number of people that fit that criteria.
But you think you're ready, you think you're qualified, you think you have the experience to be president if you make that decision?
I do, but I think we have other people as well. I think in essence, I think our party is blessed to have a number of people in that position, and the question is whose vision is the one that our party wants to follow.
You know something, Senator, I don't remember Barack Obama being asked that question one time, and yet here it is in less than a minute. You're asked that question twice, which I think proves a point I've often made, that media is dead in this country and that you don't get fair, objective, balanced coverage, and hence the lack of coverage about the president's lack of experience, his radical past, his voting present on controversial issues, all these things, and his friendships, associations. I don't remember. Do you?
Well, I don't remember either. I'm sure it was asked at some point. And here's my point on it, though, is that I haven't made a decision about whether that's what I want to do, but I'm more than happy to talk about what I've done up to this point. And as I told you last night on your television show, I'm more than happy to compare my resume at this stage in my career to that of the president's. I've served, as I said, 14 years in local, state, and federal government, 8 years in the Florida legislature, eight of them in leadership, including running the Florida House of Representatives as Speaker, 3.5 years now in the Senate, where I have had more intelligence briefings in my time in the Senate than the president did on the day he announced to be a candidate. So, as I said, we're blessed as a party. We have a number of people with extraordinary qualifications, but he was asking me the question. I'm more than happy to answer it.
You know, it's interesting because you said something that very few politicians ever say that have a political office, and that is, I'm not going to hit an eject button. I'm not going to have an exit strategy if it doesn't work out, because often is the case, if it's a senator that's running for president, they're going to also run for the Senate, and if they don't win, they get to go back to the Senate. John Kerry is a case in point. John McCain's a case in point.
Yeah, I mean, Florida law doesn't allow it to begin with. But, I mean, I think the question they were ensuing is what I try to entertain both for a period of time. And as I said, I've made no decision in this regard. I know it's one I'll have to make. But if I make the decision that where I want to serve this country is in its highest office, that's what I'll want to be, and that's what I'll be focused on. And I won't have a plan B in that regard.
Are a lot of people asking you whether or not you're going to run, or more importantly, are they asking you to run?
Well, that's an interesting question. I'm not thinking we're at the stage yet. Certainly I have people that support me and will support me in anything I do, and there are some that encourage me to aspire to another position. I think there is curiosity about who the field will be and who will decide to run, but I would imagine there, as we know and has been talked about in the press, there are a handful of people in our party who have decisions to make, and I suppose I'm one of them. And when the time is right to make that decision, I will, taking into account a number of factors, and many of which are personal and family related, but primarily whether that's the right place for me to serve this country and continue to pay it back for all it's made possible for me and my family.
To what extent, I know you were very friendly when Jeb Bush was governor. You were the House Speaker, as you pointed out at the time, and you had a good relationship with him, and I know that he was very supportive of your run for the Senate. Does that impact your decision at all about running?
Well, you're right about that, and we continue to be good friends, and I'm an admirer of his, and I hope he is of mine, and we've worked together on issues. I think he would be a very formidable candidate. I think when you decide to run for something like the presidency, you do so based on your own criteria, your own outline of what it is you want to do with your career and your time. You don't really make that decision with other people's plans in mind, and as I've said repeatedly, I would guarantee you he would give you the exact same answer as will others. So it won't be a factor in what I decide.
Now, a lot of people I know, because I talked to some conservatives, and some are still mad over the immigration bill that you signed on to, and you've since you pulled back from that bill, and you said it's not what I wanted, it's not what I thought it was going to be, etc. Jeb Bush also has an issue that has come up recently when he said it's an act of love. Illegal immigrants, etc. What is your? I actually have the audio. Here's what he said.
The way I look at this is someone who comes to our country because they couldn't come legally. They come to our country because their families, a dad who loved their children was worried that their children didn't have food on the table, and they wanted to make sure their family was intact. And they crossed the border because they had no other means to work to be able to provide for their family. Yes, they broke the law, but it's not a felony. It's kind of it's an act of love. It's an act of commitment to your family. I honestly think that is a different kind of crime. There should be a price paid, but it shouldn't rile people up that people are actually coming to this country to provide for their families. And the idea that we're not going to fix this, but with comprehensive reform, ends up trapping these people when they could make a great contribution for their own families, but also for us. So I think we need to get beyond the harsh political rhetoric to a better place. The great number of people that come here to this country come because they have no opportunities in other places. They may love their country, but they come here because they want to provide for their families, and they can make a contribution to our country if we actually organized ourselves in a better way.
What's your reaction to that?
Well, look, I think it highlights what a difficult issue it is. There are people that come here because they're very desperate, and they're going to do whatever it takes to provide for their family. And then there are people that come here because they want to skirt the law and benefit. And I think that's true, and that's why it's such a difficult issue. They're both true. And part of the challenge we have is culling through that and trying to figure out how to adjust to it. And even further complicating it really is that we are a very compassionate country, and these human stories that we'll hear about will touch our heart. We're also a sovereign country that has a right to have immigration laws and to enforce them. And so what I endeavored to do in our effort last year was to come up with a solution that would address these things, knowing that not everyone will be happy. And, as I said, yes, the Senate bill was not 100% what I would want to see in a piece of legislation if I had to write it all by myself. I certainly think it's a lot more conservative than it would have been without my involvement. And I continue to believe it's an issue that needs to be addressed, although I am, as I continue to tell everyone who will listen, I don't think you can do it in one big, massive, comprehensive bill. I just don't think that's possible.
Do you regret supporting it at this point?
No, I don't regret being involved in it at all. I think many of the solutions that we came up with are solutions that will ultimately be ones we adopt. Some will not be. There are very valid criticisms of portions of that bill, criticism that I made, both internally and externally. It's a tough issue. I think it needs to be solved. I'm not claiming it's the number one issue before the country, but it's an important one. But I think most people would agree with me, including most of your listeners, that the right way to approach it at this stage, and probably at every stage, has been to first do the things that are required to ensure this never happens again. Let's go to a merit-based system of immigration. Let's put in place mechanisms to enforce the law so this won't happen again. I think if you do those things, people are willing to have a debate about what to do with those that are here already. Now, if you've committed a serious crime, they're not going to get to stay. Beyond that, I think people are not going to even be willing to talk about it until those other things happen first.
Let me ask you about the health of a presidential candidate, because the issue came up with Hillary Clinton, this mysterious health issue she had. Karl Rove made some comments. He's going to be on Hannity tonight to explain it. Do you think the presidential candidate should be releasing their medical records? Do you think the people have a right to know, or maybe know some, or where do you stand on it?
Well, I think it's a relevant issue. I don't know. I have any insight into Secretary Clinton's health, and I wouldn't comment on it, but I think that is a relevant issue to ask. You want to make sure that individuals you elect to an office of that magnitude, of that importance, where you're making decisions in a very stressful situation, have the physical capability to do the job. It doesn't mean you can't have anything wrong with you, but again, I wouldn't venture to comment on her health situation. I don't know anything about it.
But generally speaking, let me ask you.
I think it's relevant, I mean, for anyone. Now, I'm not just singling her out. I just think for anyone, that's a relevant question, and that's why historically presidential candidates and presidents have released their health records.
I have a list of headlines in front of me. You made a comment over the weekend that you don't believe, and by the way, I agree with you, that human activity is causing dramatic changes to our climate. And literally Time Magazine, the New Republic, the LA Times, The Hill, The Guardian, The Daily Beast, NBC, Talking Points, everyone made such a big deal about this, and I wanted to give you a chance. We got 2 minutes left in this segment. I wanted to give you a chance to explain why you don't believe that.
Well, a couple things. If the climate is changing, yes, the climate is always changing, and that's a measurable. Scientists can look at that and say, here's what the climate used to be, here's what it is now, and measure that difference. And that's always been true, and that continues to be true. Here's the second question, though, is what is man's role in it? And I think the scientific certainty that some claim isn't necessarily there in regards to what percentage of a contribution man-made activity is made to that. But here's what's more important as a policymaker. Their claim is that if we stop doing certain things, that will change back. That's absurd. In fact, even in the very reports that they cite, they admit that that's not the case. And so you'll have a tornado somewhere, and or a drought, and you'll have the president or his supporters show up and say this is happening because of climate change, as if to imply that if we eviscerate our economy by imposing cap and trade, these things will stop happening. No. That's ridiculous.
So when the French foreign minister goes to Washington, as he did today, and said we have 500 days to avoid climate chaos, you think this is alarmism?
Yeah, here's what I always get a kick out of, and it shows you the hypocrisy. All these people always wag their finger at me about science and settled science. Let me give you a bit of settled science that they'll never admit to. Science is settled. It's not even a consensus. It is a unanimity that human life begins at conception. So I hope the next time that someone wags their finger about science, they'll ask one of these leaders on the left, do you agree with a consensus of scientists that say that human life begins at conception? I'd like to see someone ask that question. It's never asked. And that's not even a debatable thing. We can actually see that happening. I mean, that is a proven fact. And yet that's a scientific consensus they conveniently choose to ignore.
Boy, really well said. All right, Senator, when do you think you'll make a decision about 2016?
Well, I think that's a decision that one will continue to think about, not just me, but others. But I think at the end of this year or an early part of next year, that's something I'll have to be decisive on and begin to take action. So you'll be among the first to know, Sean.
All right, appreciate it, Senator. Well, by the way, I'm soon going to be you're soon going to be my senator. So I have a very
Is that final?
I'm going to Florida, and I'm going to get a little Texas ranch. I've decided I'm leaving New York when my kid graduates high school.
Well, that's a great choice, and we'd love to have you in Florida.
Yeah, I have a little place in Naples, and that's and maybe you and I can go out and play golf and swim in the ocean.
You got to make a bigger place in Naples.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. That's what my wife says. All right. Thanks, Senator.
For having me.
Appreciate it.